Is it right for certain people to be able to create money without any energy, whereas some people are not given that privilege? I think what Dave Ramsey is missing is this is the result of the fiat debt-based money system. Money no longer requires energy to make, so we have to reduce our energy. Okay, so compared to a worker in 1974, a worker in 2021 can afford to buy 13,891 fewer cans of tomato soup.
That's brutal. That's a can of soup an hour. Fiat money is stealing 1 or 1.5 cans of tomato soup from you per hour.
But then Fidelity has the crazy report where they're saying like by 2038, it could be $1 billion per Bitcoin, $1 million for a house in America during my lifetime.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm here with my friend Daniel Hirschberger. A lot of you may not know Daniel, but he's a friend of mine, and he's written a book and started an organization, Bitcoin is Better. And so in this discussion today, we're going to talk about why Bitcoin is better. We're going to talk about what Bitcoin's potential future value is going to be, both in terms of fiat price, but then also in terms of humanitarian effort and helping people around the world, in particular, the working class, because that's what your book and organization focuses on. So, Daniel, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate the work you're doing. So, how about you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Luke. I deeply appreciate your friendship as well. Um, I think I'm like you. It's just like history is changing so quickly. So just to be able to witness this in real time as money is changing and working with these people who are just like on the grassroots, on the ground level of actually like changing how our system has worked for 100 years. Like it's just so cool and yeah, a big fan of what you're doing as well, Luke. But a quick introduction. My name is Daniel Hirschberger. I've been in the Bitcoin space since 2020. It was definitely COVID. COVID opened my eyes to, what in the world is going on. We've got, the economy shut down, but the stock market is like skyrocketing. Real estate prices are skyrocketing. And I was just like, what in the world is going on? Because personally, we sold our house, our family home on March 12th, 2020. So I was like, oh man, I dodged a bullet. We closed on the 12th of March 2020 and then just to watch like the price continue to go up and up, I was like, something's not right here. So my background is as an engineer. So I built databases and built forecasts for Fortune 500 companies, including banks. And I've been a full-time entrepreneur for the last 5 years. So that's the background that I bring to Bitcoin, kind of the perspective. And it really, I mean, but it wasn't until COVID when I started asking, what is this money thing? Because money is just a database. And it's like, okay, how do new dollars get created? How many exist? Who gets to create new dollars? Like all these questions I never asked until yeah, just the chaos of COVID. um, and out of that just came a deep appreciation for Bitcoin because it's not until you understand the problem that you appreciate the solution. So out of that, I just came away with why don't more people know about this? Like I've felt this. I've been looking for this solution since 2011. There's a picture of me on my honeymoon with my wife, and I'm reading a book called Broke by Glenn Beck. And the book talked about how there were hundreds of trillions of dollars in unfunded liabilities. So like I've been carrying this problem for a decade, but it wasn't until like I started to ask better questions about money when I actually understood the problem and appreciated the solution in Bitcoin. So that's really the reason behind the book is asking better questions from a common sense working class perspective. And I've got a copy of the book here. It is Bitcoin is Better, Natural Money That Works for the Working Class. Because the system we have now, it is not natural. The dollars, they are debt disguised as money. And really, I mean, gold did a great job for thousands of years, but there was so much trust involved that we could say with a straight face that Bitcoin really could be the invention of money. The first time we've hit all of the properties that money should hit. So it's really exciting. and I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about bitcoinisbetter.org as well. The idea from that stems from, I think it might have been Saylor who said this, just because we're decentralized doesn't mean we need to be disorganized. And I feel like, I mean, you see everybody wants to work in the Bitcoin space. You know, I just saw River posted a job application last week and they had like 300 likes, like just a flood of applicants. So there's all these people that want to give back to the Bitcoin community. But I really feel like we need to have an organization that can pull all of that together and orange pill the working class, because the working class is the proof of work in our economy. So that's a little bit about me, but happy to be here, Luke, and wherever you want to take this conversation, man. Let's go.
You brought up a couple really good points there. A funny one about the job. A lot of Bitcoiners, someone earlier today asked me, someone yesterday asked me, like every day, you know, I do lots of Zoom calls, emails, you know, social media, and all the time people ask me, how do I get a job in Bitcoin? And the funny thing is, I don't think a lot of Bitcoiners realize that, you know, there's a lot of other Bitcoiners willing to do the work for super low pay or for free, right? And so it's like, oh, I want a Bitcoin job, but you know, there's not enough supply of jobs for the demand of jobs. And then like all the ones that are hiring, they don't pay well enough. I was like, well, yeah, because Bitcoiners are so passionate that it's like, what other industry are there like so many people willing to work for so few jobs and like willing to do the work for cheaper than someone just to be able to do it, right? I mean, so anyway, it's a funny point you bring up there. And I think it's a good effort to have bitcoinisbetter.org organize that and bring more opportunities to people, hopefully in the future. I think your point about natural money is really interesting. I think your point about asking better questions is really interesting. So I suppose what do you think are those better questions for you personally that you had to start asking? And how do you think that translates over to people yet to start asking those questions? What were the questions you were asking that were not great? And then the questions that have been the better ones for you?
So I'll start with a not great question. The not great question is, how do I make more money? And I feel like, especially the working class, we've just felt like we've got to be a landlord, we've got to be a professional investor, we've got to trade on Robinhood to make ends meet. So I think that was the bad question I was asking before I discovered Bitcoin. The better question is, I mean, it goes back to Breedlove. What is money? Who gets to create the new money? Who gets to use the money in the future? You know, how is the money created? How much exists? I had the chance a couple weeks ago to go out and I went to a college football game, and it was a packed house, 50,000 people. And my wife and I went out and just asked people questions about money. And I spoke with people who had their masters in finance, one guy worked at BNY Mellon. And I held up this dollar bill and I asked him, I said, how many of these are there? And he's like, I'm not really sure. I was like, well, if you get within $1 trillion, I'll give it to you. And I tell you, I asked over a dozen people. Nobody got within $1 trillion. And I was like, do you understand? Like, if there's only 100 of these, I'm the richest man in the world right now. I should have security all around me. If there's a quadrillion of these, I can't buy a stick of gum with this. So money supply matters, but no one knows how much money exists with the dollar. I mean, we trust the M2 money supply, but I think that's what's different with Bitcoin. I think that's what's coming, that we'll look back on in decades and be like, wow, people didn't know how much money existed and they were working so hard for it. Whereas when people understand Bitcoin, they'll be like, yeah, of course, never more than 21 million or 2.1 quadrillion sats. It'd be common knowledge. But yeah, I think that the complexity of the dollar, because the dollar is complex. Like, for anyone who's read the fiat standard by, you know, Safety, like, you know, it's complicated how the dollar works. Bitcoin is really simple money. And I think that's the biggest lie, especially among the working class, is that Bitcoin is too complicated to use, when really it's much simpler, in my opinion, than the dollar.
Well, I mean, just for supply alone, it's much simpler, right? I love your question. You asked all those dozens of people or whatever, but to a certain extent, it's like kind of a trick question because you don't even know. Daniel, you don't know. So why are you asking them saying, oh, if it's within a trillion, I'll give it to you? It's like, how do you know it's within a trillion? The data could be wrong. It's
Yeah,
just government presented information. It's the question is not even how many dollars are there. It's what is the currently reported number of dollars from the government, which is slightly different. And some people will be like, oh, that's cheap semantics, but it's kind of a fundamental difference there between them. So anyway, yeah, so it's predicting the supply is so much more complicated. This is something we were talking before we jumped on the call recorded here. It was something I was thinking about is that with the halving, Daniel's been talking about having goals by the halving, and I have my own goals by the halving. In 2024 here, Bitcoin's having supply issuance halving. And something that came to mind was thinking about how right now we're in this ancient world of political money where Jerome Powell or Yellen or whomever comes out and makes a new change to the cost of capital, cost of money. And Bitcoin basically does the same thing with the halving, right? It changes the cost of capital, quote unquote, where it changes the monetary supply, the issuance rate of currency units for the whole world, right? And so I think over time, the halving will only become more and more widely known and more recognized as this really important event. But in regards to complexity or simplicity, the difference is with Jerome Powell, it's very complicated. The meetings are much more frequent than every 4 years. It's like every, couple weeks or, whatever, every few months, there's a major change. Every year there's, a huge change, right? And so, and so it happens much more frequent. It's much less predictable. It's much more closed of a system, and it applies to far fewer people. With Bitcoin, it's much more open. It's much more transparent. It's much more predictable, and it applies to everyone. And it's a lot simpler. It's like, okay, reduce 50%, and that's it, right? But with political money, maybe interest rates go up and liquidity goes down and funding over here goes up and this 3-letter thing and that 4-letter thing. It's like, then you're like, okay, aggregated together, what do all these do to the total monetary policy? So anyway, I love your point about how Bitcoin actually is simpler. And I think so much of learning about Bitcoin is unlearning the things we've learned about the complex fiat system. So
yeah,
those are great questions. What are some more of those questions that you had to ask yourself that got you to Bitcoin? And who asked these questions to you? You're asking these questions to everyone else. Who's asked them to you? I mean, obviously during COVID, you were figuring this out on your own, but how did you come up with these better questions? Just on your own? You heard someone else ask them? Like, how'd you
yeah,
get there?
yeah. No, I'll give you the short version of my orange pill story. So during COVID, we sold the house. We moved about 7 hours away to Central Florida, and I had a real estate investment business, and I got a house under contract. It was a mansion with like a fire pool. It was just over the top. Like, yeah, it was a very, very nice house. So I asked the owner, naturally, what do you do for a living, to afford this really nice house? And he said he was an investor. So naturally I asked, well, what's your favorite investment? And he said Bitcoin. And I said, Bitcoin, were you one of the guys that got in like 10 years ago at a few bucks? And he's like, no, you should look into it. So he subscribed to a crypto research newsletter. So I subscribed to the same one as he did. And I went like 50% Bitcoin, 50% crypto. Ended up owning like 30 cryptos and Bitcoin. Um, and it wasn't until I went to the Bitcoin conference in Miami. There was one line that stuck out to me. It was, crypto is the attack on Bitcoin. And I was like, what? I've never heard that before. So a very toxic thing to say, but it made me ask the question, okay, why is Bitcoin so much different than crypto? So then I dove down that rabbit hole. And yeah, I just came away with, upgrading the money will upgrade the world. Like, I don't go as far as saying fix the money, fix the world, but it's definitely going to make things better, because money touches everything. So I'd say, like, realizing what Bitcoin was, once that happened, I was like, I can't go back to real estate. Like, I want to be a part of this Bitcoin movement. Like, I want to do this full time, whatever capacity that looks like. And for me, it was like, I I wanted to look for the need in the community, and the need that I saw was all these people want to contribute to Bitcoin, but there's no real way to like organize all of this passion to share share with the working class what this Bitcoin thing is and why it exists. So I laid the groundwork for the nonprofit about a year ago, and in doing so, I was like, I really need to collect my thoughts and refine what this means. Bitcoin is better, because Bitcoin is better means something different to everyone. So I took 9 months full-time research writing and was able to write this book. And I narrowed it down to 5 chapters. So I've got a money chapter, economics, politics, property, and health. So how this debt system has made all of these things worse, and how Bitcoin can make them better. So that's sort of the short version of my my Orange Belt journey and what's brought me to today. So yeah. Any questions?
No. I think a lot of people follow the same trail, right? They meet someone and that person's like, Bitcoin, you should look into it. And most of them are like, okay, I don't know about that. And then, once in a while, someone like you actually does that. And then they become those people that are like, hey, you should look into it, right? Yeah, I wrote a book on it. You should look into it. Read my book. So I'd love to go through those 5 points: money, economics, politics, property, health, right? So give the rundown of money. If you're going to explain to someone, me or someone listening, perhaps they're a blue collar worker, new to Bitcoin, or perhaps they are Bitcoiner, what do you think is the best summarization of that for us telling that to people that are new to Bitcoin, or again, if someone's new to Bitcoin, understanding that?
Yeah. So to start with money. So with Bitcoin adoption, I think really there's 2 major ways that you adopt Bitcoin: number go up, or theft is wrong. I think number go up gets complicated because number also goes down, right? So I feel
Sometimes.
like sometimes, yeah, for short periods of time it does. I think the theft is wrong is more sustainable for adoption. I think that helps you to ride the waves as we ride this S curve up, as Bitcoin is adopted by the world. So with money, the question is like, is it right for new money to be created without new work? Is it right for a privileged class, whether that's passport privilege, whether that's Wall Street privilege, whether that's politician privilege? Is it right for certain people to be able to create money without any energy, whereas some people are not given that privilege? So that was what was great about gold. Everyone, it didn't matter if you were a king or a peasant, you had to dig up the gold. It required energy to be created. So the high level of my first chapter is breaking down the history of money and how we got to today in a simple way, as we walk through history to understand the problem, and then introducing Bitcoin. So yeah, I mean, that's the hardest chapter to get through, is the first part of my book, the first chapter of money, because
Yeah, it's pretty
hard.
abstract, right? Like
Yeah.
people think, why is some money more natural than other forms of money? But that's a great point you just brought up, that natural money, naturally emergent money, takes work to produce, right? Back in the ancient world, when people use salt or tin or stones or seashells or grain as food, they use that as money. All those things took work, and they were only valuable because they took work to produce, right? But then, of course, things get more abstract. We realize, oh, a number is more scarce than those commodities. And so we went to numbers, but then with numbers, they can be created out of thin air. And that's the downside with that it's much more fungible, much more divisible, and much more instant than those commodities are, but they can be within human control, and humans can manipulate those numbers. So when it comes to natural money, why is Bitcoin specifically natural money? I'm sure part of it is what you were just talking about how about how Bitcoin takes energy to create, but are there other components too that you would say make it more quote unquote natural? Or can you define and elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. So in the book, I define it as natural money is money in its most natural form, which is energy. Because really, money is just economic energy that we store for future consumption. So the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be transferred, right? Um, so as far as natural money, I think it mirrors gold, except it's more scarce. And I actually add a characteristic of good money. So typically there's 6 characteristics, durable, divisible, portable. Um, I add transparent because it's the first money that's actually, we can check the rules. It's a public code. So like when Jamie Dimon goes on TV and he's like, oh, we don't know, in the year 2140, a Satoshi message could pop up and say, ha ha ha, I scammed you all. Well, Mr. Dimon, like, show me that in the line of code that I'm running on my node.
Yep.
If Bitcoin's a scam, show me where it is, Dave Ramsey, and I'll be the first one to say, okay, you're right. We'll do something
Yeah.
different. But the public nature, I think it lets us verify the energy behind it. But I don't think I'd add anything on to it being natural money besides just it's energy in its
Mhm.
simplest form. It takes energy to produce new Bitcoin.
Well, I think transparency is a good point. And I think part of the real world is transparency, right? So if you want to talk about natural money, the scientific process, the physical world, the laws of the universe, like those things are transparent, right? Anyone that looks hard enough and applies enough energy at looking can come to the same conclusions, the same observations, right? And that gets to the whole objectivity versus subjectivity. And we're both Christians. We've talked about this before a few times, but about how Bitcoin brings that objectivity to people, and why I think so many people begin asking deeper questions, improving their health, which we'll get to more in a little bit, pursuing faith, religion, philosophy, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, I'm sure. But ultimately, I think a lot of that comes back to that objectivity, that Bitcoin is this kind of objective thing that you can objectively see how many Bitcoin there are if you are just willing to look. And I think the Dave Ramsey, Jamie Dimon kinds of folks that you're mentioning, I think they haven't looked, right? For whatever reason, perhaps bad intentions, perhaps just ignorance. I think that's most people, that they don't see that it's objective, and they assume it's just subjective because everything else, all other forms of money, we're so used to these forms of money that are subjective. It's hard for us to wrap our head around, oh wait, this form of money is objective, right? So anyway, I think that could be another component of natural money too, is that transparent factor, because it reflects the laws of the universe, right? There is a politics, right? Or no, economics.
Economics, yeah.
So why do you separate the two? Why money and economics? Why not just throw that into one chapter? So if you could elaborate on what that's about.
Yeah. So the money chapter is really meant to answer the question from my perspective, what is money? Economics is what is work? Why are prices getting higher when prices should be falling? As our friend Jeff Booth says. And I'd say too, like when my wife and I went out to that football game a couple weekends ago, we just we had these signed bookmarks. So I created these signed bookmarks with 5 better money questions on the back. And we had this like flow of people across the bridge. So my wife and I, we just stood on either side and we just like started shouting like Bitcoin one-liners and like handing out these signed bookmarks for my book. And the question that got most people to stop is if technology drives down costs, why are prices getting higher? Prices aren't getting higher. The value of your dollars are being printed to be worth nothing. So that was funny that like prices are like a big advertisement for Bitcoin. I think prices are having people ask a lot of questions. And one of the great conversation starters that I like to have with people is if I'm just out at a park and I'm talking with someone, is just, hey, why do you think prices are getting higher? And 9 times out of 10, the answer will be supply chains. COVID broke the supply chains. So I like to ask the question, have you ever looked at the supply chain of money? And I usually just get like a blank stare, like, oh, I've never really thought about the supply chain of money, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So then I proceed to share that like there's 30 times more dollars today. Well, let me rewind. In my book, I use the time frame of 1971 to 2021. So we've got 50 years of this fiat debt standard to look at the data. So over that period of 50 years, 30 times more dollars were created. So how in the world is the economy supposed to keep up with that? How are our productivity gains supposed to keep up with 30 times more money? And it's no wonder that like the working classes burn out. No wonder like Gen Z is feeling hopeless about the future. So economics, I really dive into that, and I try to use some like real world examples as well. Like a can of tomato soup, Campbell's tomato soup, hasn't really altered its ingredients to be cheaper like other food to hide inflation. It's stayed basically the same for over 100 years. So we had a period of like 70 years, like 1890s to 1970s. It was 10 cents for one can of Campbell's tomato soup. Today we're like $1.20 something. So over $1. Why? You know, we've got robotics, we've got industrial farming, right? Like, why? And it's because the money's broken. So economic,
Yep. No,
yeah,
yeah, no, you're spot on. I think that's a great question. I think that's why so many people gravitate to Jeff Booth's thesis. And you're really challenging me because now so often when I try to share Bitcoin with other people, I'm just like, please, just trust me to at least look into it. I don't buy it, just learn about it. And people don't care, but I have to talk about how I think people either come to Bitcoin through pain or through curiosity. And perhaps I'm realizing this for myself as you're talking. I'm like, dang, it's so obvious. Maybe I shouldn't be pounding the table on Bitcoin at all. Maybe I should just be asking questions, right? Because fundamentally, if I think, okay, they're either going to have pain or curiosity, well, then maybe me personally, but then also Bitcoiners in general, like maybe our whole strategy of talking about why Bitcoin is better is not even most optimal. Perhaps it's asking questions that eventually lead to the understanding that Bitcoin is better, and I think that's such a powerful question because technology is undeniably advancing super fast, right? And if you think, okay, dollars or money scarce, technology makes stuff more and more abundant, it's like pretty objective, going back to that objectivity thing, that price should be coming down. So to your example of the Campbell's, can you enable screen sharing here? I'm going to share the can of soup price chart for people. That's a great example, because a can of soup is pretty universal over time, right? Like that is something that has not changed dramatically with technology. And so, digital products is something different that, people could maybe say, oh, well, that's new, that's different. We've got history before, but Campbell's can of soup, or can of soup in general, we do have that history. And so if we, look at what Daniel was talking about here, we look back, we see that from the late 1890s all the way to 1971, the early 1970s, it was pretty stable. And it wasn't until then, when we left the gold standard again, where money became unnatural, like Daniel's saying, that things kind of went off the rails here. And so, Daniel, you also brought up a funny point about how we've increased the money supply by 30x, right? And do you know how much the S&P 500 has gone up in the same time frame?
Yes, I have
Yeah?
that down. I wanted to share one more thing about the tomato soup before we move on.
Yeah, go
Because-
for it.
Because a lot of people will justify that and say, well, yeah, but income has gone up, right?
Yeah.
So it's kept up. Let me see. I want to get you the exact number. Um, let's see. Okay, so compared to a worker in 1974, a worker in 2021 can afford to buy 13,891 fewer cans of tomato soup than a worker in 1974. So 13,000
Wow.
less cans of tomato soup
A year? What's the
per,
time frame on that?
per year.
Yeah. Okay. So 13,000 cans of soup. What is that cans of soup per day? That's probably what, 36,000? 13. What did you say? What was that number? 13,000.
13,000. Yeah, 13,891.
891 and 365 days. Yeah, 38 cans of soup per day less we're able to buy, right? It's that's brutal. That's a can of soup an hour. Fiat money is stealing at least 1 or 1.5 cans of tomato soup from you per hour. That's that's I was recording a podcast with Preston Pish yesterday, and he was talking about the sailor metaphor of bloodletting, right? And we'll
Mhm.
get to this later in your health chapter with your book, right? But I think that metaphor is so good because it's like it's draining the energy, it's draining the life force from you. But that's funny. 1.5 cans of soup, it like actually is bloodletting. I mean, obviously, can of tomato soup kind of looks like blood, but beyond that, it's like it's literally harvesting calories from you over time, right? And I don't know about you, Daniel, but I was thinking about this last night, just about how so many people I know just have that angst. And like I know we talk about all the time, but I go in real life in normie land and it's like it's real. When I look at these data points and charts or go on all these podcasts that are like to a certain degree, seeing it in real life is strange because it's like, oh wow, yeah, this is all real, right? Like people, even Americans, have like this inability to put food on the table,
Yeah.
or inability to put quality food on the table consistently, reliably, and meet all their other obligations, right? And it's just when you put it that way, 13,000 less cans of soup a year, divided out 1.5 cans an hour. That's just yeah, theft.
Theft,
Wow.
theft is wrong. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking too. And that's in America. That's a land of the money
Yeah.
printer, right?
Yeah. 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 I was just in El Salvador, and this is something I did a speech. I was at the Adopting Bitcoin conference. And this was the point of my speech, right? It was about how Bitcoin aligns incentives, and with fiat, we don't have those aligned incentives, right? And so, even in America, it's 1.5 cans of soup an hour. But in El Salvador, it's like, how much worse is that? Because they use the dollar, but they're further down the line from us. And then the rest of the world, the rest of Latin America, that have their other currencies, not the dollar, because at least they have the dollar, right? So anyway, yeah, that's really powerful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And so because we're having the cans of tomato soup stolen from us, because that's being sucked out of our pantries, right? The bloodletting from our pantries, that's why these prices go up. That's why the value of all these things go up. So, like I was going to say before, the stock market, in the last 50 years since the early 1970s, the money supply has gone up by roughly a factor of 29 or 30. Again, depending who you ask and exactly when you're watching this. And the S&P 500, the base American stock market, has gone up by literally almost the exact same multiple, like 28, 29x. And so when you frame it that way, it raises the question, wait a second. People look at the stock market and it goes up and people say, oh, wow, America's economy is getting stronger and bigger and better. But then it's like, wait, it's got the exact same multiple of monetary units over a 55-year timeline. It's like, that's a pretty strong coincidence, right?
Right.
Especially when people are using the stock market as their form of money, right? People don't save money for retirement. They save stocks in their 401k, right? So
Mhm.
anyway, it's perverse and it's messed up.
Yeah. And in my book, I actually name it the inflation industry. And that's true. Like I have, so to back up a little bit into the money chapter. So 30 times more money today than 50 years ago. That breaks down to 6.9% per year. So if you're not getting a 7% raise every year, you're getting a dishonest pay cut. Um, so when we measure, like in my book, I measure the S&P, Dow Jones, 10-year Treasury bond, median home price, and gold against this 6.9% dollar destruction per year. And out of the S&P, Dow Jones, 10-year Treasury, median home price, and gold, which one do you think would do the best and which one do you think would do the worst, just intuitively? To protect your money from inflation if you had to go
Yeah.
back, 50
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. The options being gold. The options being gold, real estate. What else? And stocks.
S&P 500,
S&P.
Dow Jones, and Treasury bonds.
Well, it's either between the S&P or Dow Jones.
Yeah.
Right. Which is it?
S&P.
S&P. Yep.
S&P. Yeah. That was an annual return of 7.8%. So you got about 0.9% ahead if you timed your trades right. Like, you don't want to retire during a recession.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also you're probably paying, $10,000 to $20,000 to the inflation industry in fees each year. But the S&P was the best at almost 1% return over that 50 years. You want to take a stab at the worst?
Well, Treasury bonds. That's much easier. Come on.
Well, that's what I thought too. I've been listening to Greg. I've been listening to Greg Foss a lot too.
Yeah.
But it's not Treasury bonds.
Well, and not only Greg Foss or James Lavish or those like it, but it's the whole trust but verify thing. It's like, oh, those Bitcoiners, they only listen to those 3 or 4 bond experts talking about it, right? Foss, Lavish, and a few others. But it's like, then you go verify it for yourself. How do bonds get created, right? You have Congress, you have the Treasury, you have the Fed, you have the banks in between the bonds and the issuance of the currency for those bonds. And like you studied, how the whole thing works, and you realize, oh wait, James Lavish with this whole debt spiral, he's not absurd. Greg Foss talking about how fiat is 100% certainty it's going to debase. It's like, oh wait, he's not wrong. It's like, it's not just the people saying these things. When you go verify it, oftentimes, in my opinion, it's actually worse than what they're portraying, and they're trying to curtail the paranoia they have, right? Or curtail that at the risk of sounding too absurd to where people don't listen to them. But I think oftentimes it's actually much worse than what they're talking about. But
and see, I think this comes too from our recency bias, because that's what I thought too. Because like, bondholders got completely screwed with COVID. They're buying these, very low yielding bonds, and now they're high yielding and they can't sell them off their books. But actually, bonds weren't the worst. What's really nefarious is that median home price was the worst place to save your money over the last 50 years. It had, adjusted for the annual dollar destruction, minus 1.2% per year return. So homes are not a savings account for the working class. The working class needs a real savings account.
That's brutal. I think perhaps, that makes sense to me. I think there are 3 immediate thoughts that come to mind, though. The first thing is that in that period of time, we had 40 years of lowering interest rates in those Treasury bonds. So, I mean, you could argue that bonds have had a 40-year artificial bull market, I would say. And that's clearly reversed. That clearly reversed in 2020. I realized that in 2020 was that. I wasn't sure if it was reversing then. It turns out it was reversing then, but I knew either it's reversing now or at some point it's going to reverse, right? The other thing, though, I think with median price of houses is that yes, you could treat it as an investment if you're trying to price for how you put it of the annual rate of monetary destruction, but houses have costs that owning stocks and Treasury bonds don't have, right? Obviously, with the house, you have to maintain it, you have to keep up with it. And so that is a added downside to the real estate. But then at the same time, too, I think that another difference with real estate, though, is that it's very easy to borrow against it, right? Compared to stocks and all that. So I'd be interested to see how that ranking changes when you factor in the lack of interest rates going down for bonds, plus the disadvantage for real estate being that it's analog and therefore requires maintenance. But then the upside being that you can easily borrow against it, right? I mean, it's just, again, it's all about simplicity versus complexity. It's like
a nail in the head.
And and I think this is why there's so many financial gurus. There's so much financial noise out there, is because so many ways it's right. It's like people are like, oh, should I rent or should I own? Well, if I own, I got to time the market, got to last for this many years, all the interest rates, all the monthly payments, and this and that, and the other. And then even your ranking, what should be a quote unquote simple ranking, gets so complex when you add in just 2 or 3 different things. Now, well, it depends on the city you live, depends. And so there's it, and then again, timing with the stock market, it depends largely on when you time it. Are you buying at the, I'm sure that number dramatically changes if we're measuring from the peak of the 2000 .com bubble. Obviously, the stock market recovered, but you had 10 years of negative or low returns, right? And so it gets so complicated. Now, a side note that I wasn't really thinking we'd talk about this conversation, but I'd love to now that you brought him up, but Dave Ramsey. So speaking of the financial noise out there, speaking of people that talk a lot about finance, I'm a Dave Ramsey fan. I took his class, Financial Peace University, many years ago. I'm a Christian, you're a Christian. Dave Ramsey also is very famously an outspoken Christian, but yet you poked fun at him a little earlier, and I often poke fun at him too. But when it comes to him, what do you think he's missing when it comes to Bitcoin? Because of all the financial quote unquote gurus, experts out there, he's one of the most simple and one of the most straightforward, and has really helped a lot of people. So when it comes to that, what do you think he's missing when it comes to Bitcoin, or how do you think the Bitcoin worldview changes the mantra that he always talks about?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And like you, like I'd say 70-80% of what Dave Ramsey teaches, I agree with. Debt is a spiritual form of bondage. It's used throughout all of the Bible to describe sin, basically. I think what Dave Ramsey is missing is asking better questions, especially on his show. It's like he uses Bitcoin as almost a punchline. I think he's compared it to Beanie Babies. He's talked about nerds turning off a switch on Bitcoin and it being gone tomorrow. So there's like not even a fundamental understanding. Like that's one thing with like Peter Schiff. Like Peter Schiff, he has read the Bitcoin Standard. Like he's educated himself. I don't understand his arguments against Bitcoin, obviously. But I listen to them and I have respect for it. So I think Dave Ramsey just really needs to like dive into the what is money question. And if dollars are debt disguised as money, and the entire industry in which you promote like is based on debt forcing us to blindly invest in Wall Street and these index funds that don't align with our values as Christians. I think it boils down to asking better questions, and hopefully that humility is there of if he is wrong and if it goes against his vested interest in selling more mutual funds or selling more complex products in his own business, like having the humility to say, I was wrong about this Bitcoin thing. I'm going to give it another look and at least come up with a better counter argument.
Yeah. I think there's a lot there. Peter Schiff, another great example, right? I think so much of it also has to come down to they already have money, right? Like Peter Schiff already has a lot of money. Dave Ramsey already has a lot of money. Jamie Dimon, of the three of them, has the most money, right? I'm sure. And again, if Bitcoin comes down to learning about it through pain or through curiosity, I think those with a lot of money obviously have less pain, right? That's a big part of what money does. It buys you less pain, right? At least financially speaking.
Great.
But then secondly, I think if you have a huge amount of money, then you become a little less curious, not necessarily. And I think curiosity is essential if you're going to survive as, even a wealthy person. And I think that's perhaps a lot of their downfall. But I look at Dave Ramsey and I think, wow, he's been doing this, 30 years, telling people get out of debt, helping people, his actions directly or indirectly have changed thousands, tens of thousands, whatever, lives for the better, getting out of debt, et cetera, helping people retirement, whatever. And I would think if I was in his shoes and I had seen that, and I would seen that everything I've said has been right again and again and again after the haters, I think Elon Musk also falls into this category, right? I think Elon Musk, he's got a bunch of money. Like Dave Ramsey, he's been told again and again and again. He's wrong. He's wrong. Oh, that's not possible. You can't do an electric car. You can't launch rockets into space, right? And with Dave, people tell him, oh, that snowball versus avalanche, right? People have all these reasons as to why they don't work, and yet Dave Ramsey in the past has kept proving them wrong. Elon Musk has kept proving them wrong, and Peter Schiff, again, I think is another example. He predicted the 2008 great financial crisis. Everyone told him he was crazy, 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 and then he was right. And then in 2020, when everyone was saying, "Oh, we're gonna have deflation and blah blah blah," of course, he's one of these Austrian economists that say, "No, we're gonna have inflation," and he was right. And so I think a lot of it is that when you've been told you're wrong so often, and you keep proving to be right, and you're right, and in all those cases they are right. I think there's a lot less curiosity there to consider other people's perspectives because you've had like almost that PTSD of not wanting to learn, right? And so I don't know about you, Daniel, but I honestly think those guys, Dave Ramsey, Elon Musk, Peter Schiff, three very different people and personalities, and
All went
levels of
into a
wealth.
room together. Yeah, all went
Yeah,
to
if they went in
yeah.
a room together. But really, you have Elon, the technologist, Peter Schiff, the gold bug, and Dave Ramsey, the mutual fund personal finance guru. It's like, I think really in all those cases, it boils down to that human psychological element of that. I've been told I've been wrong for 30 years, 20 years, whatever, and I've been right. And I know I was right then. And Bitcoin doesn't make sense in my worldview. I look at Dave Ramsey, and I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but it's just something I've had a fascination with. With Dave Ramsey, really his advice, his personal financial advice is get out of debt and preserve your energy in hard assets that will appreciate in purchasing power in terms of the dollars as they slowly die on an annual basis, right? Like that's really his whole mantra. That's his whole business, right? His business is helping people do that precisely. And so then suddenly, if a form of money comes in, let's say Bitcoin, that is not denominated on debt, where people get into debt much less frequently, and then simultaneously does not require that permanent inflation of assets. I mean, first of all, you have a financial problem because that's against your business model. But then secondly, it's such a fundamental shift that not only does it erode your business model of providing the solution for people, but it also erases the problem entirely, right? I mean, theoretically. So it's like at both ends of his business model, like just completely reduces it. Like he can't sell these mutual funds and collect those fees and have Financial Peace University if people don't need those mutual funds and the fees to manage those mutual funds. But at the same time, if people are getting into debt less, so it's like that great irony that I think Dave Ramsey would be a huge Bitcoiner if he understood Bitcoin. And like I've listened to a lot of the guy. I mean, that sounds crazy, I think, to a lot of the Dave Ramsey folks. And a lot of those Dave Ramsey fanboys I know that, were in the same class with me or, elsewhere, also know I went in it. It's like, they think I'm crazy for being the Bitcoin bro. From their perspective, they're like, you were on the right path. You were getting out of debt and you were doing wise long-term investments. I mean, I had a lot of mutual funds back in 2017, 2018. Almost all my, money was in mutual funds, right? And now here I am, the crazy Bitcoin guy doing a podcast going on a rant about what Dave Ramsey misses, right? And 99 times out of 100, the crazy people hating on Dave Ramsey have been wrong, but all it takes is that one technological paradigm shift that
Right.
the person is not curious enough about. So anyway, I'll
Maybe
quit my rant, but
too. Yeah, something that just came to mind is like debt
yeah,
goes both ways. So it's like,
yeah,
okay, if I break free, if I call in and scream on Dave Ramsey's show, that I'm debt free, and say I've got $1 million. Well, I mean, if you read the dollar bill, it's a Federal Reserve note, right? The Federal Reserve has debt to me. If I go out and I own 10 houses free and clear, the county database administrator, like they owe that to me. So it's like this Bitcoin thing, like once you have it, nobody owes you anything.
because it's a bearer asset,
Exactly.
like gold. Yep, yep. Crazy to think about. So okay, so I think we've talked a lot about the economics one. Let's get on to the politics one because we have three more topics to get through. So politics. How does Bitcoin make politics better? Obviously, I think this becomes self-evident once you realize that fiat money is political money, and reforming political money could reform politics. But if you have any specifics you would talk about in your book or you find fascinating, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so I'll transition from economics to politics because there's a little bit of overlap there. I think we're all like the working class, I think Jeff Booth said this first, like, we don't want another enemy. We want a solution. Because I feel like division is like the strategy of the devil, really, of evil. Like, we should be unifying, we should be coming together. And just thinking through this book, I can't think of a more unifying message politically than lower prices. Like, from the CEO down to the worker, it's like, if I'm more productive this year, all the prices are going to drop in Bitcoin. So I think that that would break through the red and the blue noise to align on one political message of lower prices, higher living standards for everyone. In politics, it's like everybody's complaining about political corruption, but we're allowing our politicians to have blank check budgets. So it's like, really, you expect for corruption not to creep in when we're giving our politicians blank check budgets? So the idea that Bitcoin could bring fiscal responsibility back to government over the next decades, I think that's really exciting, because it's like when you divorce money from reality, like politics becomes divorced from reality. And when the circus is broken, they send out the clowns. And that's what we see now in American politics. It's one big clown show where we're like, really, are these the best we have to offer right now in our country? Like Joe Biden, Donald Trump, like, is this the best we have to offer for leading our country? And it's just, if you want the truth in politics, you follow the money, right? It's like any good detective, you follow the money if you want the truth. So this book, I did that in my politics section, and it was shocking. Especially, I'd say the most shocking part was how the news media works. And advertisement dollars.
I'm glad that you're taking the time to learn about Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin's potential future value, both in terms of political currency units and on society as a whole. And I'm really glad that you're taking the effort to study and educate yourself about Bitcoin. However, I must make this message incredibly clear. If you are learning about Bitcoin, you must begin also learning about self-custody and taking possession of your own keys. This is really, really important. You can watch as many YouTube videos as you want talking about how Bitcoin is going to skyrocket in fiat price and how the number is going to go up. You can talk about that all you want. You can daydream about this kind of vertical spike action for Bitcoin. You can daydream about this all you want. But my encouragement to you is that this is not a meme. This is not something to be taken lightly. We can think that this is a good thing, and it is a good thing ultimately for Bitcoin's long-term adoption, but this is real. Okay, this really happens in countries. You know, it may not happen in your country for some time. It may happen in a stair-step fashion, but this is not a meme. This is not a joke. And so, therefore, you need to take self-custody really, really seriously, okay? I work full-time in self-custody solutions for people. I help people set up their multi-sig vaults. I help people set up their estate plans. I help people with a collaborative custody partnership and collaborative custody models, okay? This is a chart of the amount of interest we have at the Bitcoin Advisor, the company I work at, okay? This is not me personally. This is the whole company. We've been in business 7 years. Not a single client of ours has ever lost a single sat, okay? We have a good number of clients, and this is our demand. My point in showing you this chart, my point in showing you this message right now is that it is increasingly urgent, increasingly important that you begin taking self-custody very seriously. I'm telling you, I'm on the inside of this all day, every day, 6 days a week, and demand for self-custody is skyrocketing, okay? The kinds of clients we have, the number of clients we have, the conviction in the clients we have, it is only going up, okay? And people are booking meetings with me weeks, okay, in advance. In some cases, over a month in advance. And we are in bear market, okay? This chart right here is from October 2023. Okay, like incredible low interest globally in Bitcoin, and our demand is still skyrocketing, it's still spiking. And my encouragement is that if we have a bull run, if we have parabolic spikes such as this, where Bitcoin goes rapidly upwards in terms of price, if we have these periods of time, okay, transaction fees are going to spike. Okay, exchanges are going to halt withdrawals. Okay, people are going to panic. They're going to smash by any price. Okay, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have any time with people to help you in your self-custody setups. So first and foremost, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, whether you go somewhere else, whether you figure it out on your own, whatever the case, please start figuring out self-custody. Hot wallets, cold wallets, single sig, multi-sig, whatever you do, just start figuring it out now, because I'm increasingly alarmed by the number of Bitcoiners that do not have self-custody. So please, if you have any Bitcoin self-custody, but especially if you have a large amount of Bitcoin in self-custody, please start taking this stuff seriously because it's only going to be increasingly important in the future. And so, if you'd like to work with me, if you'd like to hear my opinions, perspectives, and ideas on this topic, you can find me at the Bitcoin Advisor. This is precisely why I work at the Bitcoin Advisor, because I believe this is such an important topic here. Okay. You can find me there. You can have expert guidance on how to self-custody Bitcoin, to buy, secure, and store it properly for the long term. We can have tailored strategies for you, what your long-term vision is, both for yourself, your own individual future, your retirement, and for your future generations as well. Again, multi-sig vaults, estate plans, all these things for you. Okay, you can just book a free meeting with me here and the link down below in the description. Again, the first consultation is completely free, where we can talk about your priorities and see if there's a value add both for you and for the Bitcoin Advisor as well. And again, our goal is to help you have generational wealth for you and your loved ones and your children without losing sleep. Okay. And that's why not only do you get a free initial consultation, but you have dozens and dozens of pages of education about multi-sig, self-custody, how to store your Bitcoin properly, things to avoid, things to pursue. Okay. Again, dozens and dozens of pages of free education for you to be learning about this increasingly important, increasingly urgent topic. Okay. And then you can learn further about the Bitcoin Advisor and why we provide much more value for half the cost of our competitors. You can learn about all this and more in that link in the description, where you can book a free consultation with me at the Bitcoin Advisor. So again, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor or you try to figure out on your own, please just start taking action now. Because in a couple of years, higher and higher net worth people are going to be entering the space and demanding self-custody. Okay, more and more companies, more and more charities, more and more pension funds, more and more churches, all these things, all these groups of people, all these entities are going to be coming into Bitcoin very quickly, and they'll be willing to pay the transaction fees. They'll be willing to pay whatever fiat price and get for their sats. They'll be willing to do the self-custody as fast as possible. And so my encouragement to you, again, I'm glad you're enjoying these videos. I really appreciate you subscribing and commenting and being a part of these videos and increasing your Bitcoin education. But please, please, please do not stop at the end of this video. Immediately after you watch the end of this video, please start taking your self-custody seriously, whether that's with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, again, link in description, or it's on your own. Whatever the case, please just do it. Thank you.
Are you going to sell ads to peaceful people who are pragmatic about their politics? Or are you going to sell more ads and more eyeballs to angry people? So, I mean, what if the news isn't meant to inform us? It's designed to startle us, to get our eyeballs. So yeah,
I think,
go ahead.
yeah, I think the most infamous example of this obviously is 2020, when you were figuring out Bitcoin, when I was figuring it out, when Saylor was figuring it out, when, you know, many people watching this, probably most people watching this show probably only started asking these questions in 2020 or after, right? And I think that's a great point. You know, obviously probably a lot of people watching this have different views on COVID itself, the vaccine, lockdowns, etc. But I think no matter what their personal view is, I think it's abundantly clear that there was an absurd amount of misinformation around all of those things, and an absurd amount of political incentives, an absurd amount of money, right? I mean, you know, not even a left-right issue. Like if we just think of China, it is a fact. It is abundantly clear that China suppressed information on COVID immediately after. And why is that? Well, it's because they had to defend their political interests, because, you know, the communist state, they have to, you know, keep tight, very tight reins on their public image, and therefore on their money printer. You know, like that whole culture, that whole political sphere is very, very dependent on that. And then likewise here in America, you had massive, massive incentives surrounding the stimulus checks and PPP loans. People, I remember it was constant like news, like update the next stimulus check, update the next stimulus check. It's just constant updates, constant vying for the lever. Who gets the stimulus check? Who gets more money in their stimulus check? Who gets it first, et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's like a bunch of kids at a candy store or playing at like a giant claw machine, you know, like an arcade or something, all vying for the little joystick of who gets to push the button and get the toy they want, right? It's childish and it's amateur, but it's what we did. You know, massive incentives with the PPP loans, and then obviously certain states had massive incentives against other states. You know, and it's just on all sides, there was just so much false information, and all the time, you know, like in my personal friend group, I'm sharing yours, Daniel, and other people watching, it's like people just get burnt out with the news, because it's like you see endless news articles, it's endless paranoia, endless pessimism, endless depressing stuff, and almost all of it, you have this feeling that it's just has so much spin that it's like, is it even worth it, and you're trying to figure it out, and it's so much work to get through that
It is.
because there's such a massive monetary incentive behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. So much noise. And it
Yeah.
really, I mean, it plays on your emotions. If you sit there and
Yeah.
watch the news all day, like you're not going to feel good.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
going to feel healthy.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. And in the book too, I dive into like the hottest political issues right now, the most controversial, and then just break it down to how better money could make it better. So one
Okay.
example is immigration. So illegal immigration. It gets people on both sides very worked up,
That's
very
for sure.
angry. My thesis is that over 90% of the people coming to America probably don't want to leave their families, probably
Yeah.
don't want to leave their friends, their home country. But it's like we've got this money printer that's acting like a magnet because in all of these, especially South American, Latin American countries, like they save in dollar bills. So we're exporting our inflation onto the world. And just, I mean, it's logical, it's reasonable that they would want to come to the land of the money printer. So it's like if we, I don't know if this is a decade from now or multiple decades from now, but like if Bitcoin becomes the world reserve currency and that's neutralized, we're no longer the land of the money printer. Like, how does that change the incentive? Because I mean, how many families are broken up because the dad has to come to America and work and send money home and get charged 5 to 10% by Western Union to send money back to Latin America. So I think that's just a different way of thinking about immigration. It's like, again, if you want the truth, follow the money, follow the incentives.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And I think we were talking before we got into the podcast here, but in El Salvador, that's one of the beautiful things with what's happening in El Salvador is that a lot of people here in the United States have moved here from El Salvador for working opportunities. And now, over the last couple of years, with the cartels gone, with economic opportunity improving, with more tourism and everything of that sort, a lot of El Salvadorans that have immigrated to the United States, many legal, many illegal, are considering going back to El Salvador because it's safer, because they can be with their families, they can go back to their business, to their livelihoods, their homes, right? And so, in irony, it's better for America because there's less of an illegal immigration problem from El Salvador to America. But then simultaneously, it's better for El Salvador because less of their talented, brightest, and smartest youth are leaving the country and taking their talents and their abilities elsewhere, right? So I fully agree with that, and it's very encouraging me that we're already seeing that on a very, very, very tiny microcosm of El Salvador, and that will probably grow to everywhere in the world. That if someone's going to immigrate from one place to another, they're going to do so legally. They're going to do so because they want to, not because they have to, and they feel indirectly forced to in order to get to the money printer. So, yeah, that's great. So then, how does that tie into property? Why is property separate from money? Is it money the ultimate property? Why is property a separate chapter in your book?
So the property chapter is separate because I think throughout history, we've had to defend our property on the physical realm. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's defended on the digital realm, cryptographically and with, hash power. So Abraham Lincoln, he defined property as the fruit of labor. So again, going back to theft, all throughout human history, humans have been stealing from each other. And Jesus said, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, John chapter 10:10. So if Bitcoin reduces the stealing of property, maybe it can reduce the killing and destroying as well. And with property, like, again, like if you look at the dollar bill, a lot of people would call this property. We've got George Washington's face on it to build trust, "In God We Trust" on the back to build trust. But in my book, I actually found this quote. It was between let's see, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And before I ask you this quote, I've got a question for you, Luke.
Go for it. What is it?
What is your least favorite food?
Oh, my least favorite food? Oh man.
Yeah.
Putting me on the spot here. I really don't like artichokes.
Okay.
I don't know why that came to mind, but I don't like artichokes.
Okay. How would you feel if after you died, I started an artichoke company and I put your face on all of my artichoke packaging? Luke's
I think
artichoke.
it'd be funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically what happened to George Washington. He got put on the
Got
dollar
it.
bill.
Got
And
it.
here's his specific quote. He said, "Paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever have to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open a door to every species of fraud and injustice." That's what George Washington had to say about this dollar bill. So in the property chapter, I go through the most popular forms of property and I explore ways to steal it from you. How do I steal real estate, artwork, gold, all of these popular instruments for us to save our wealth? And then I make the case for why Bitcoin is the most difficult to steal. I mean, to guess someone's seed phrase, so if you memorize 12 words, to guess someone's 12-word password for their Bitcoin, it's like 340 and 33 zeros. That's your chances. So for the first time in human history, we have property that doesn't need to be violently protected.
Yeah, that's getting to the whole realm of the software thesis with Jason Lowery, right? I mean, obviously he's not the first one to point it out, but he pointed out from that distinct war perspective, or how do you defend your property rights, right? Is it analog, violent, or is it some other form, right? I have to think about deer, right? Here I'm in Michigan and we see deer all the time, bucks with antlers. And that's the cover of software. That's the whole idea of, if you have how do deer determine who gets to control property, right? I mean, you can think of food, you can think of mating rights, you can think of territory, whatever, right? How do deer control that or decide who gets to control that? Either the deer have antlers in which they fight, and whoever is the winner of that fight goes on to control, and hopefully, ideally, typically the deer don't die from that confrontation. But if the bucks don't have the antlers, then the only alternate is to fight till the death, right? And we see that with animals all around the world, right? We see it with lions, we see that we see it with bears. Any animal, we see it with wolves a lot. Any animal that has territorial disputes or property disputes, they try to settle it in a nonviolent way, and then they have a way of settling it in a nonviolent way. So wolves, obviously, another example. Obviously, they do fight and they do kill each other if it descends into that. But that's what barking is for, right? Biting versus barking, right? Barking is a warning. It is the nonviolent way of projecting power, projecting force, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole thing with Bitcoin, this is how Henry Ford predicted it in 1921, right? This is the whole idea. Ford thought we can make this energy money that doesn't require a gun to protect it. And so I agree with you. I think that's really profound that, wow, what if we could defend property without a gun, do we dramatically lower the economic incentive to produce and use guns? I mean, I think so. There's currently, not to get political again, but there's currently this conflict in the Middle East that has again sprung back up between Israel, Hamas, Iran, the Saudis, that whole mixture, right? With a lot of foreign influence and preferences from the US, from Russia, from China, from Europe. There's this whole battle over that region. Obviously, there's religious realities there, and that is separate from the economic realities. But fundamentally, it's like on top of the religious disputes, there's like this kerosene being poured on the fire of all the oil in the region, the Suez Canal in the region. Just there's so much influence, both directly in that conflict and then in the surrounding areas. That's why everyone kind of has a hand on it, a hand on that joystick, right, to try to manipulate the outcome of that conflict. And so, anyway, I fully agree with you that that's one of the big realizations that comes to people when they're well down the rabbit hole, but I think is really profound that, oh, wow, we could actually greatly reduce the need for us to kill each other now that we have this form of antlers to defend our property rights with. So I don't know if you have anything else to add there, but that's just kind of my musings on
Yeah.
that
No,
topic.
yeah, no, that's a great analogy. I love that, the bark without the bite.
Yeah, right. Bees are another example. I think bees perhaps are even the best example because honey, like honey is their money, right? It's like you have literally the honey pot problem for the bees, and they have stripes, and it's like with the bees, they actually die, right? Like if a wolf gets in a fight or a lion gets in a fight, they may not necessarily die, but if a bee is going to attack you, like they die, right? So they don't have any incentive to do it. They want to communicate to you before you open up their hive and try to steal their money. They want to make it as clear as day to you that, like, don't attack us. We will resort to our stingers if we have to, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, and then of course, there's so much more that can be said there.
No,
Yeah.
and that's
Again,
great.
natural money. Bitcoin's natural money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Money is honey. Yeah, I've never put that rhyme together. I like it.
Not just because it's a rhyme, but it's like, honey pot problem with money.
Yes.
Like it's the same problem with bees. Obviously, that's where the term comes from.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
that's
so
like that's like the problem, like too. I think Satoshi was really brilliant in solving this, because it's like if you have this transparent public ledger, like, does privacy just go out the window? Because I've gotten a lot of pushback from people on that. Like, it's a public record. So how are we going to maintain our privacy? But I think that discounts like the ingenuity of the Bitcoin community, because I've heard some really great ideas, like having packets that serve like cash that you can just scan and make sure the Satoshis haven't been spent, and you can trade it just like you would cash. Another,
I've seen one little startup like that.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So ideas like that. And then, like, I know that you're a part of the Bitcoin Advisor now, and I had the chance to speak with some guys from OnRamp as well this past week, and they're working on like multi-sig collaboration. And just the idea blew my mind, because the honeypot problem, right? Like if BlackRock stores all of their Bitcoin at Coinbase, and Coinbase gets FTX or whatever, down the road, like that's a big problem. But you could actually like have multi-signature with multiple different institutions, multiple different countries all over the world, and you remove the honeypot problem.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's huge.
That's a great point. And, since you brought it up, I'll elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think there's something else to push there, is that a lot of Bitcoiners right now, when they have single sig, it's like the money, the Bitcoin they hold itself has successfully avoided the honeypot problem, right? There's no central place where you could take the Bitcoin. However, we've essentially distributed the central honeypot problem away from Bitcoin itself to now all the people that own Bitcoin, right? If you are someone that has 21 Bitcoin, you have 1/1,000,000th of all the money in the world, theoretically, right? And if you have 2.1 Bitcoin, which I think a lot of people today would think, oh, it's not a lot, I missed the boat. It's like 2.1 Bitcoin is 1/10,000,000th of all the money in the world, right? If we assume that in the future there's 5 billion houses, for people, or maybe it's a little much, but like let's say even 3 billion houses in the future, right? If there's 3 billion houses and you have 1/10,000,000th of all the houses in the world, what is that? That's 300 houses worth, right? Do I have that math right? I think I do. It's like,
and you think too, like corporations and governments are probably 50% of it.
Yeah. It's like, that's conservative, again, with the Lavish and Foss thing. It's like, okay, you could just think first principles there. Okay, if there are 21 million Bitcoin, and if I have 2.1 Bitcoin, then I have 1/10,000,000th of all the Bitcoin in existence. Then that's easily, hundreds of houses worth, right? But there's also the businesses there. There's all the other productivity gains. Like you said, what if people take so many more of those Bitcoins concentrated, or lost? Millions of those Bitcoin are lost. There's very, very few Bitcoins left on exchanges, draining rapidly. It's like, you really start thinking about this and you realize, wow, I have a lot of Bitcoin. Even with just 1, 2, 5, 10 coins, that's a lot of money. And so the problem being, again, the honeypot problem. Now you've just created your own honeypot, right? And unfortunately, Daniel, I'm sure you've heard these stories. I hear them all the time. At my work at the Bitcoin Advisor, just being in the Bitcoin space, people have their houses broken into. People take it from them, they lose it. It happens all the time, and it's like you've created this little mini honeypot. If you have talked about Bitcoin, if you've ever searched Bitcoin in your Google searches, if you've ever gone to a Bitcoin conference, it's like people in the future, in the present, but particularly in the future, look at you and are like, hey, he was into Bitcoin back then. He probably has a couple coins. Eventually, when a coin's worth a few $1,000,000, now all of a sudden it's like you've just made wherever people suspect you're keeping your seeds a bigger target, right? And so that is why I'm so passionate about multi-sig, is that you can basically do your best to minimize the size of your honeypot, right? Whether that's a large allocation of multi-sig vault or a small allocation, if people know that person A is a hardcore Bitcoiner and they're super anti multi-sig, and person B is a hardcore Bitcoiner, probably just as much, if not more Bitcoin, but they have multi-sig vaults and they've made that known publicly. All of a sudden, who's a bigger target? The one with the bigger honeypot, right? And maybe you can't get it, right? Oh, boating accident, you can't get my keys. Obviously they can't get it, but it's a perceived larger target, right? And so, I talk to people all the time about mitigating their trade-offs and thinking that through. But I think a lot of people are not understanding the significance of multi-sig because they think, oh, single sig is the only way to go. And I think it is definitely a way to go. But I think more people are going to diversify in that, because having 2 Bitcoin at 40 grand a coin is very different than having 2 Bitcoin at 400,000 or 4 million or 40 million at a coin, right?
Right.
I often joke the trade-off of becoming rich in Bitcoin is that you become a larger target, right? So, and there's many other benefits too, right? Obviously distributing the keys, different geographic locations, there's so much more to be said there. But when it comes to that, I agree with you. And I think that's why I'm so bullish on multi-sig. And that's why I encourage anyone watching should seriously consider getting multi-sig for that reason, that as more Bitcoiners realize this, and for us as individuals, you, me, Daniel, people watching, it's an option. For companies and corporations, they have to do that, right? Like MicroStrategy can't just give Michael Saylor all the keys, because then, okay, honeypot problem, right? But they have to have multi-sig. And likewise for individuals, as their personal Bitcoin stack becomes exceedingly valuable, I think that's only going to be more important for people to consider that as a potential option of getting that different trade-off. Obviously the downside being that you distribute those keys out farther and wider so that, they're harder for you to access directly as if they're in their back pocket. But then the benefit being that, that even if, even if a bear comes in and takes your honey or you lose it from your back pocket, you still have something, right? So anyway, I've said enough about that, but I think we're just so early that so many of these things are yet to manifest.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic on the ingenuity of people. I mean, we've got really amazing solutions today, but like 10 years from now, I mean, who knows what this will look like? But we've got people of like mind, the brightest minds working on this. And we've got the base layer being the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's exciting times. And I close my property chapter with a few different popular predictions for the future value of Bitcoin, because I think to really take self-custody seriously, you need to understand what you own. So, I mean, Hal Finney, I cite his email where he says 10 million a coin. And interesting.
When does he say that? Emphasize that for people. When did he say that?
It was shortly after.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a week after Bitcoin was out there. This was well over a year before Bitcoin had a price, right? Today people say 10 million, people say you're crazy. Hal Finney said 10 million years before it was at $1. So
right. He was the crazy one that helped change the world, right? And it was interesting too. He didn't say 21 million. He said 20. And we know Satoshi has 1 million in his wallet. So that's another little nugget that I took from his valuation. So he said 10 million back in 2009 dollars. And then Jesse Myers, he's got some really great stuff that I cite in my book, Courageous. And I think he comes it's such a wide range because we don't know. But then Fidelity has the crazy report where they're saying like by 2038, it could be $1 billion per Bitcoin. which is just
In,
crazy.
in purchasing power, in purchasing power.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, those valuations, I think people need to know what they own, because like the saddest stories in Bitcoin are people who had just like, 100 Bitcoin at $1 a piece, and then they sold it at $10, or they just lost their laptop. So you need to know what you own. And I steer away from making specific predictions because I don't pretend to know what the dollar is. Like I don't know how many will be
Yeah.
in existence 10 or 15 years from now. So my metric is buying a house. I think by 2040 it will be over $1 million, the US median home price, and less than 1 million Satoshis. So I just did like a trend of
That seems about right.
the last 15 years. And it's
That's
like,
crazy.
I don't know how long it's going to take, but the scarcity of Bitcoin, I don't think people realize like you can get 100 Satoshis for like less than $400, or 1 million Satoshis for less than
I was gonna
$400.
say, what happened to? Yeah, I was gonna say,
The price.
what are you talking about? Yeah, 100 Satoshis for $400.
Right, we're there.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, millions
Yeah,
of Satoshis for 400.
I think that's the right trajectory. If the median house price has doubled in the last, let's say, 10 years, right, more or less, maybe from 150 or 200,000 to 400,000, like people all the time focus too much on the change itself and not the rate of change, right? When it comes to El Salvador, people are like, oh, El Salvador is only at 1% adoption. But it's like, yeah, but the rate of change going from 0% to 1% is a massive change in, a couple of years. Or likewise with inflation. Going from 2% inflation to 4% inflation, that's not an increase to 2%, that's a doubling, right? Same thing with house prices. $1 million per American house, I think, is extremely conservative if we're looking out in the future, because house prices went from, like my grandmother, for example, when she bought her house, many decades ago, she bought it for $20,000, 20 grand. Okay, a new, basically new house, right? I think it was only like 2 or 3 years old, right? Then she sold it for 200,000 2 years ago, right? Now it's probably worth like 220 or 230 or more, right? And so that's an increase by factor 10. That house, probably in a couple decades, is going to be worth $2 million. And that's just an average house. Like I said, it's $200,000 today. That's, half what many other houses are. So it's like, that shifting of people's unit bias up, I think that's so important when it comes to Bitcoin, when it comes to everything else, that, hey, the average house in America is going to $1 million, $2 million, or maybe even $5 million or more.
The question is that a good
Yeah.
thing? Is that a good thing for shelter to go up?
No, it's not.
Mm.
Precisely, right? Like we talked about efficiency earlier. Like how many people needlessly are freezing or starving or dying every year because we're forcing energy, shelter, and food costs up every year, right? Like that directly impacts the poor the most, right? And both you and me as Christians, we're all about helping the poor, right? And obviously you don't have to be a Christian to desire to help the poor, but Jesus specifically made that a command to Christians to help the poor, the meek, the widows, and the orphans, right? And so for me, it's like it's this great irony that and perhaps maybe we can get to that Christian mindset too, because it's like so many Christians look at me and are like, oh, it's the get rich quick mindset. Oh, he just wants to get rich. Didn't Jesus talk about the desire to be rich is really dangerous and all that? And it's like I hear that and I understand that, but at the same time, it's like, yes, I'm in Bitcoin because I want to make money, and yes, I want to get rich. And simultaneously, I'm in Bitcoin because I want to see massive impacts for people across the planet, right? The bottom 5 billion people that don't have property rights, like we've been talking about, And so it's that funny, ironic perspective shift, right? That Bitcoin perceived as the highest risk asset is the lowest risk asset, and then simultaneously, the thing that's perceived as the asset of greed, let's say, is actually the most humanitarian asset in the world, right? And so but then it is greed, but then it is that. So it's like that weird dynamic. And a lot of people criticize me for talking about my faith on publicly or whatever. And this is the last thing I'll say about that. But the funny thing is that yes, I talk about my faith online because I do believe I'm commanded to talk about that. I do believe it's best for my particular worldview and interests and belief for my Savior. But then simultaneously, I think it's also better for Bitcoin, you know, and I think it's not a bad thing when people share their worldviews, their personal worldviews when it comes to their monetary worldviews. Like if someone's an atheist, I think they should make that known. If someone is a Muslim, I think they should make that known. If someone's a Christian, you know, I think they should make it known. Other Christians see me, they see me talk about this. I'm like, oh wait, he isn't in it just for the making of the money, right? There is that humanitarian effort. So again, Bitcoin's about aligning incentives. And that's a huge part of why I talk about my faith, because it aligns incentive, you know, for me following my commandment to preach the good news. It keeps me grounded in that if I have my own story, my own brand, my own narrative, my own face and name be associated with that, then it's like, I know I can't deviate from that, or I'm not going to like just hide that in the corner somewhere, because from day one it's outspoken. And I think it's also better for Bitcoin because, you know, Christians have a quote unquote Christian voice in Bitcoin they can go to, learn about within the worldview, and have that perspective, right? So anyway, to me, that's what I love about that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts more about that
Yeah.
dynamic of Bitcoin as the asset of greed and humanitarian efforts.
No, I've gotten the same pushback. I sat down with a church leader and shared my vision for Bitcoin is better. And yeah, he pushed back and he said, "You're distracted. You're distracted from the gospel." So it's a question I really wrestled with and I've really prayed through. And the analogy that I've gotten where I find peace is with water. So Christians, we will go out and we will dig wells and bring clean water to people because it helps the poor and the oppressed. We need to have the same mindset with money. Clean money matters to the poor as well. Because, I mean, just like dirty water, if you're drinking dirty water, you're going to get sick, you're going to die. If you're using dirty money, you know, how do you buy your water? How do you buy your food? How do you buy your shelter? So that's where I found peace. It's like Bitcoin is a big idea. So like financially, if we're rewarded for taking this risk and being the first 0.5% of people to adopt it, like great. I mean, I look forward to, you know, having that financial ability in a couple decades. But like right now, it's like clean money versus dirty money. Giving property rights to 8 billion people, or just being like, you know, it's not my problem. You know, I live in America. Like, I don't think that that's where we should be in our faith. Is just in our own little bubble. We should also look at the poor. What did James say? That religion that our Father accepts is keeping yourself unpolluted by the world, and to look after orphans and widows in their time of distress. Who are the orphans and widows? You spoke about it. They're the poor. You know, it can be spiritual or physical orphans and widows, but that's the poor. And I mean, we both dove down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, and it looks like the best technological solution to empower the poor to be able to keep the fruit of their labor. So I think it's a big deal, and I don't think as Christians we should shy away from talking about money. I mean, I heard Pastor Coyne talk about his book recently, and he said 25% of Jesus's parables were about money. So it's like if he talked about it and it was important to him and he used it in his parables, like why do we shy away from it?
Well, I think it is worth saying though that Jesus's parables about money was not about money specifically. He's using money as a parable for spiritual, eternal, perpetual truths, right? Same thing with food. Food was another one that, and farming and agriculture, you know, that was another major one that he was communicating to people, right? You know, Jesus was using the mediums at which the people would understand to communicate things they would not understand, right? You know, it's the same reason why I talk about Bitcoin in terms of fiat price, right? You know, I can say Bitcoin is going to $100 million US, and that's an absurd number. But people that are in the dollar system would not understand me saying, oh, Bitcoin prices and all productivity gains in society without inflation debasement. It's like they don't understand that. But I say Bitcoin's going to 100 million, and that's the stepping stone for them to get to that final spot, right? It's funny when I talk about high Bitcoin price predictions, you know, people think I'm being absurd or being clickbaity, and I am, right? It's what gets the people to click. But aligning incentives there at the same time, it's like they wouldn't get to that other point if they didn't start asking those questions, right? We're talking going back to questions, right? They won't start like, why does he think that? And why is he so certain? Why is he so confident, right? Like I have more confidence saying Bitcoin's going to 100 million US dollars than saying it's going to 100 grand next year, right? Because I don't know that, but I know it's going to 100 million dollars. Oh, you can't say that, it's inevitable. Well, you're only saying that if the dollar decreases in value. It's like, you know, I get lots of hate for saying that, but then through the haters, there are lots of other people that silently understand and have their perspective shift. You know, it's that stepping stone. And so in the same way, obviously I'm not comparing myself to Jesus. I mean, I guess I am a little bit, but my larger point being there as a metaphor is that the parables on money Jesus gave in a similar way, money, there's not money, you know, money is not like the spiritual truth, but it's the way at which we communicate, or the way at which Jesus communicated to the farmers, right? It's why he used farming metaphors, food, agriculture metaphors, you know, because most of these people were herding goats and farming wheat and olives, right? You know, I mean, that's the way at which you communicate to them. That's the whole storytelling, communicating a message to an audience perspective, right? So I think your point you brought up about water is a really good one. You know, I get that too. And you know, I know we're talking a lot about the Christian worldview here, but even those listening that aren't Christians, I think this applies to you, because I'm sure you've had your family talk about how you've gone too deep down the rabbit hole about how you have how you're distracted, right? You know, maybe they're say you're distracted from your career, your family, or whatever. But I think it's really telling what you're saying there, Daniel, about, you know, if I was to travel the world and go on podcasts and talk day after day after day about vaccinating children in, you know, sub-Saharan Africa against measles, right? It's like, you know, that people would probably look at me and say, oh, wow, he's really passionate about that. Good for him. I wouldn't want to do that or go that far or take that much risk or whatever, yada, yada, yada. But, you know, it's for a good cause. I get it. You know, thumbs up, right? But I do that with Bitcoin, right? I travel the world. I do these podcasts and make videos about it day after day after day. And it's sometimes it's received that way with that thumbs up of approval and appreciation, but oftentimes it's not, and it's overtly ridiculed. But then most frequently it's just people don't know how to respond to that, right? They just don't know what to think with that, you know? And so I think that's important to frame it that way, because I do not think a vaccine is the savior of humanity. I do not think having infinite amounts of clean water and wells is the savior for humanity. And I don't think having a better monetary system that greatly reduces the financial incentive for theft and destruction and debasement is the savior of humanity, you know? And so that's why I always try to focus on Bitcoin as a technological solution. So many Bitcoiners want to focus on it as an investment, and I think that's not giving Bitcoin all the credit it's due. Or they want to frame it as like this divine awakening, and I think that's giving it too much credit, right? You know, like same thing with you know, clean water. It's like, oh, well, it's just water. Everyone has that. It's like, no. But at the same time, like, oh, if everyone has water, if everyone had clean water, all of our problems go away. I don't think like,
Yeah.
I mean, water is much more fundamental than Bitcoin, right? And like, this is my larger message to everyone listening. Like, even oxygen, I talk about oxygen all the time. It's like, I could get you to give me all your Bitcoin right now if I just took away your oxygen. Like within 5 minutes, you'd send me all your sats, right? And so it's like, you know, people say, oh, if everyone just used Bitcoin, the world's problems would be fixed and everyone would be so much happier and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I hear the heart of that message and I empathize with it, but I think it's wrong, because you could say, oh, if everyone on the planet just had an infinite amount of oxygen, then kumbaya, everyone's happy, you know, new awakening. And I'm like, we already have infinite oxygen, right? And that's more valuable than the numbers at which we're pricing in the things that we really care about. So anyway, I'm going on another rant here, but I think that's so important for Christians to have that, not middle ground, but to come and meet there, right, Daniel? Where on one hand, we understand that Bitcoin's more than just this little fringe thing that a bunch of weird Christians are getting distracted with. But at the same time, for those in Bitcoin, that, hey, this isn't going to be your life fulfillment, right? You know, people typically spend a few years going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and then they start to wonder, what next, right? So yeah, it's like everything in life, there's just different extremes, and the vast majority of people are on the one extreme, and a lot of people are on the other extreme, and yeah,
Yeah.
I've said a lot, maybe too
Oh.
much.
No, that was great. I mean, I just wanted you to know you're not alone. Like we all wrestle with that. And like you said, it's probably not even just a Christian thing. I mean, it's just the balance, because Bitcoin will save your money, but it won't save your soul. It won't save your family. Like, and that's, yeah, it's just,
Here's an interesting thought I want to run by you. You know, in a certain way, Bitcoin globally, I think, is more unifying than the gospel. And what I mean by that is, in the same way that everyone needs oxygen and everyone needs water, but not everyone, you know, follows Jesus in the ways of Jesus and accepts him as their savior or whatever. Like, in a way, oxygen is more unifying in this life, at least, in that way. And I think a lot of people want to divorce religion and philosophy and deep life thinking entirely from Bitcoin, because they view Bitcoin as more unifying. And I actually think they're right, but I think that kind of misses the point. So I'd love to hear your thought. Like, do you think in a certain way, like, the Bitcoin humanitarian effort is more unifying to the globe than, you know, even these other things? Like, do you think that's possible, that, like, this is, like, perhaps the most unifying singular technological movement in history?
I think so. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Jesus himself said, you know, you will be hated because of me. And Paul said that the cross is offensive and foolishness. And it's the same with any other religion. I mean, it's kind of like a sports team. You know, once you're on the sports team, to go and like the other sports team, like, you're always going to have conflict. But it kind of goes back to the economics of it as well. Like, lower prices are unifying. Like, who wants to go to the grocery store and pay more for their prices? I mean, for their groceries. If you're renting, who wants to pay more rent every year for your shelter? I mean, if you have a mortgage and you own your house, I mean, you're renting from the bank. And that's something that's overlooked here in America as well, is we have fixed rate mortgages. But I have friends up in Canada, and their interest rate changes every 3 years. Yeah, so it's like, I think that Bitcoin is a unifying technology, similar to water, similar to oxygen, similar to electricity. It's the ultimate commodity
Yeah.
for money.
Yeah, the money of a society is the ultimate commodity of that society, right? Especially when that money is hard and pure and clean, right?
Yes.
Well, I think we've already transitioned to the health section. From here, I have one more thought I guess I could add about Bitcoin impacting health, but do you have any other specific thoughts that you use to close out your book when it comes to improving the health of people via Bitcoin?
Yeah. So with health is life. And the biggest thing researching my book is, like, walking through the hardware store. Like, you see EnergyStar.gov products everywhere. So we are actively trying to reduce our energy in everything that we do. This is the result of the fiat debt-based money system, because money no longer requires energy to make. So we have to reduce our energy. And if you look at the statistics, which I mean, I've read your threads, I know you've dove into the energy poverty statistics. I mean, millions of lives are lost every year because of energy poverty. I mean, imagine driving your kid to a hospital in Africa and their machines don't turn on because they're out of the power's out, like, and they can't save your child. Imagine having to cook in your house with dung or wood, and then, like, your children develop cancer, your wife develops cancer, like lung cancer, like, because you can't afford electricity. So I think that's where Bitcoin is going to change a lot of things the next couple of decades. Like, instead of creating these appliances that reduce energy, like, we're going to create appliances that use more energy, but they work better. Like, a redirection of engineering in America,
Yeah,
based on the changing monetary system. So
that's a great point. That's a great point about how, since money takes no energy to create, we have to reduce the amount of energy that we produce and consume, right? I think, going back to the Dave Ramsey comment about how there's that subtle misunderstanding that causes that polar opposite shift. I think it's the same thing here in that we are trying to reduce energy when really what you should be doing is increase efficiency, right?
Mhm.
You know, someone can say, and I think a lot of people have genuine passion and care. They're trying to reduce energy, like they think they're helping. And in some cases they are in the short term, long term they're not, but I think they have that genuine effort, but through the manipulation of money, they believe that reducing energy is the solution, right? But they're missing that the real goal should be increased efficiency, which means oftentimes increase energy and then sometimes also reduce energy where it's not needed or reduce parts where they're not needed, right? So
Mhm.
it's not necessarily to me that reducing energy is bad. It's more so replacing the goal of increasing efficiency with reducing energy. That's bad. And equating less energy as more efficient is bad, right? You know, if we really want to reduce energy, we should just all go back to when we had no technology and all it would take would be 10 to 15 million human beings on the planet to force every species to extinct and our inefficient farming methods to starve the planet of nitrogen, right? Like just a few, like one city today, right? You know, just wipe out the entire planet besides Chicago. and then that's, you know, oh, that's the most efficient. No, that's reducing much energy, right? So
Okay.
I fully agree with that. I'm a huge proponent of that likewise. And like you're referring to, I've talked about extensively. Unfortunately, it doesn't get the clicks, right? People often criticize me, again, going back to number go up and saying Bitcoin's going to big price targets. It's like people criticize me for like, oh, you don't get the mission. You only talk about fiat price. It's like, I talk about that a lot and you do too, I know. But as we both know, far few people click on that content. I think partly because people care less, because it doesn't directly impact them, or they can't see how it directly impacts them, even though it indirectly impacts them. But then likewise, I also think it's harder to make that leap of how Bitcoin is a humanitarian effort until you go through that rabbit hole, like I said before. So yeah, one thing I often think about is the lack of heating, right? I think that's a very easy one. You know, 4.5 million people a year die from lack of heating. You know, all the examples you brought up are great. You know, bad cooking methods, hospitals not having consistent energy, you know, and then obviously lack of heating in winters. You know, we tend to not think of that because it's abstract, but we do think of disease, we do think of illnesses, we do think of sickness, we do think of hunger. And a lot of those are a result of lack of heat in the winter and a lack of energy, you know. I mean, really, I think we're still in this ancient world where it's like every year we have a mass holocaust, essentially. That's perhaps a little bit strong of a word, but you know, if we're thinking that 4 to 6 million range, it's like that's just hard to wrap our heads around. That every winter, it's like, oh, what's your favorite season? Oh, I love winter. It's so pretty. Oh, I like spring. It's like, if we're thinking purely from a humanitarian effort, it's like winter should be everyone's least favorite season because, you know, most of the world's population is in the northern hemisphere. It's like we're in the stage, we're still in this ancient world where winter is the mass death era of humanity. You know, it was that way 1,000 years ago. It was that way 100 years ago. It's still that way today. And what if in 50 years or 100 years, Bitcoin makes energy so cheap and so abundant and so prosperous that dying in the winter is a bit of a thing of the past where it just doesn't, you know, doesn't make sense. Obviously, we die from different ways, but anyway, even just a 10% increase in that efficiency, you know, that's hundreds of millions of people over the next 100 years. You know,
Big deal.
Big deal, right? And as a Christian, as a missionary, humanitarian, it's like, you know, like I could invent. Let's see, how do we put it this way without sounding arrogant? It's like, okay, Daniel, you and me, we could be on a team of 1,000 people researching a vaccine or medicine that saves 100 million lives over the next 100 years. And that is something to applaud, right? And that's something people would understand. Like, oh, yeah, Luke and Daniel, they're great. They're working on this, whatever. But then, you know, you do that with money where it saves 100 million lives or more just from stopping energy costs from going up every year. Forget food, forget property, forget the lack of theft, forget tyranny, forget all the other things. I mean, yeah, that is why I keep making these videos. That's what gets me excited. You know, the number go up stuff, that's just to bring people in as a means to the greater hope that they watch these shows and they really get that passion going, because we need more people in Bitcoin. We need more people looking for weaknesses in Bitcoin. We need more people emphasizing to the world that don't understand the significance of Bitcoin, the significance of Bitcoin. And then we also need people emphasizing to those that idolize, worship Bitcoin as a divine thing, that no, this is just a tool. And it's a tool, it's a means to the end of serving our neighbors and serving our creator, right? So anyway, all that to say is that I love it. I
Yeah.
love that message. I think it's a great place to end your book, right? Is that that's ultimately the goal. You know, money's your first chapter. That's like the least important thing, quote unquote. And then, okay, and then up and up, and then health is the last
I'll leave you
thing.
with
So
one more thing. I feel like this is too
sure.
important not to mention in the health. So I've
No,
got a
go for it.
question for you. This here, do you recognize this?
What is that, cotton?
Cotton.
Yeah.
It has a very deep history in our country.
Oh yeah. Here in America. Yep.
Yep, a very, very deep and troubled history.
Yep.
In the health chapter, diving into how Americans were convinced that that was a vegetable. 1911 Crisco was made from cotton seeds.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Really? Okay.
And the reasoning behind that, like, it's much cheaper. So it hides food inflation, which is politically beneficial to those in power in our country. But if you look back over the last 100 years, almost every disease like pneumonia, tuberculosis, like people don't die from those anymore. But cancer is up 190%, more deaths from cancer than 100 years ago. Heart disease, that's up like almost 50%. So it's like, why are these diseases skyrocketing? And the thesis that I make in my book, the conclusion that I come to is that our food has been changed because of our money. As our money's been debased, our food has been debased. And now I view the obesity epidemic in America, like I used to view it as a gluttony problem, but now I see it more as a malnutrition problem, where people are eating all of this processed food that says vegetable oil, but really it's seed oils that are like acid washed, deodorized to hide the smell of feces. Like they are not natural. It's not natural food, and our body doesn't know what to do with it. So it's just crazy. Money touches everything in society. And on a personal level, I gave up seed oils about a year ago. And before that, I was running like up to 10 miles per week. Like I was just hitting the gym really hard, could not lose any weight. And since then, like since giving up just vegetable oil in my diet, I've lost almost 20 pounds and I'm where I was in high school. And I've got family members who are doing the same thing. It's like, yeah, just go back to butter. Like go back to the things that God created. And it's just as simple as that. It's like simple money is better than complex money. Simple food is better than complex food that looks like a science experiment. Like it's just really that simple. Simple is better.
Yeah. There's a lot of rabbit holes we could go down there, that's for sure. You know, and I think it's so true. I think a big problem there also is that it gets mixed up, right? So I wouldn't say it's only one problem, right? I think a part of the food epidemic, let's say, I think is gluttony, but I think a lot of that gluttony is our sinful nature, our corrupt nature. But I think a lot of that gluttony also has the gas poured on the fire from fiat incentives, right? Fiat incentives make us more selfish and keeps our vision more narrow, increases that gluttony. You know, it's like a feedback loop, right? And the more we do that, then the more we incentivize the food companies, the more we honeypot that problem, increase the incentive. Then you bring in the politics to that. Then you bring in the sugar industry and the corn industry and the soybean industry and the seed oil industry, which then makes the products cheaper because it's cheaper and everyone's a little poorer because inflation has made us all a little bit poorer than last year, maybe 5% poorer than last year. Now we have to go with the cheaper route. We go with the cheaper route, and then all of a sudden there's all this misinformation with the proper foods, with everything else. And then some people in that misinformation go to foods and diets that actually are crazy and actually don't make sense, right? You know, not the, oh, simple is better, but they do all these weird diets and drink. And so then you have all that misinformation. So then you have the standard status quo, but then you have the misinformation, quote unquote, that's actually misinformation. And then the misinformation, quote unquote, that's the real information, like what you were just saying. And so then the establishment labels all that together. So then people are confused. And it's like, and then just like everything else, it gets more complex. You know, you corrupt the money, you corrupt the incentives, you corrupt the society. The more you corrupt the society, you increase the desire for gluttony, you increase the malnutrition, you lower the average IQ per person or per kid. And then it's just this feedback loop that goes back and back around again and again. And then we look and we wonder, how did this happen? right? Or we look back in history at historical examples and we're like, how did that happen? It's like, we just look at that and we're amazed. And I think most people, Daniel, look at them and they assume, oh, they were stupid, right? You know, we look back at ancient Rome, you know, Judea, Jesus's era, 2,000 years ago. We say, oh, they were stupid. They were a bunch of goat farmers. It's like, let's send you back then and see how long you survive before you die, right? Or, you know, even 100 years ago. Oh, I can't believe that they had bloodletting and bled people to death. I can't believe just 100 years ago they fed cotton as a vegetable. Wow, those people from the 20th century, they were stupid. It's like, I don't know about that, right? I mean, and that's the point that I often make online about how in 100 years, I think people will look back at us and have that same arrogant, privileged, in prosperity position of, wow, those people in the early 21st century, they were stupid. They trusted politicians to make money, to make numbers out of thin air, and people used them. They ate seed oils and did what? They did, like, wow, they were all idiots. And of course, then in the future, they'll think that they're so smart and they'll miss what's next and they'll have all their own problems, right? But all that to say is that I fully agree with you on the food thing. I would add a little more nuance to what you said. I think there is a gluttony problem. I think the malnutrition problem is a really great way of putting it. You know, I think obesity is a malnutrition problem in that the bad food's hijacking our brains, eating more and more and more. And so I fully agree with you. You know, I have multiple family members that, like you, got in a better diet and they lost like 15 pounds within, I don't know, 2 months, maybe 3 months, just from doing nothing else, you know, and a couple daily walks, you know, no running, no gym, nothing like that. But
Yeah,
you know, if
I
you're
switched
listening,
from running. Yeah, I switched from running to walking, and I worked out less. And I was like, wow, I just had to give up the potato chips. Like, yeah, the potato chips. I mean, that addictive flavor dust is real on
Yeah.
these processed foods, and it helped me too because like I always knew that processed foods weren't the best for me, but it was like when I could pinpoint why, that it's, you know, these ingredients that aren't natural, that helped me to, you know, break the habit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So for those listening, I'm going to talk about where we think Bitcoin's value is going in the future. But first, real quick, as we're wrapping up here for people listening, there are a couple of things I'd like to shout out here. One of them is we've been talking about, Daniel and I have been talking about energy and the importance of increasing energy for people across the world. This is a cause both Daniel and I support here, if I can get this pulled up here. But I'm going on a mission trip to Guatemala next February here. And for a lot of the trip, we're going to be installing stoves for people in Guatemala because for them, like Daniel alluded to earlier, with people using dung or wood to make food, big problem in Guatemala is that the majority of the country uses open flame, meaning this accelerates deforestation because they're using very inefficient ways of cooking food. Likewise, this means that there's increased smoke inhalation for the children. You know, if they're at home a couple hours a day, they're bringing in multiple hours of smoke per day. It means that the family members, especially the moms in particular, are spending lots of extra time cooking. And so by installing these stoves, it frees up more time for the parents, meaning there's more disposable income, meaning they can buy more Bitcoin or save for the future, right? If they, you know, for whatever they deem necessary. It means there's more time to educate the kids. It means the kids have better nutrition. There's less malnutrition. It means that the kids have more time for education. You know, again, better for the environment, better for the forest, better. And so in every way, for these people in the same way Bitcoin's an energy upgrade for the world monetarily. So if you'd like to go to Guatemala with me, if you'd like to install stoves in these remote villages, see the beauty of Guatemala, it's an absolutely gorgeous place. If you're looking to escape the coldness of winter, especially here in Northern America or Canada, this is a beautiful place to go. So first, we're installing these remote stoves in these villages. And second, we're going to Bitcoin Lake to observe Bitcoin adoption and see how Bitcoin is helping them economically. So you can go to Geyser page if you'd like to donate. That would be really appreciated. We've raised a few million sats for this cause over here. So if you'd like to donate, please do that if you really care about the messages that Daniel and I have been talking about. And consider going. Like I said, a few people are going. I'm bringing a few people along with me. So, you know, either message me or get a hold of me, put it in the comments, or message me on Geyser that you want to go in the little message description of your donation. Additionally, also, I want to shout out Daniel's Bitcoin is Better. This is his website, bitcoinisbetter.org. If you want to read his book, if you want to learn more about his services, what he's hoping to do, if you want to be on his board or get involved, see what they're doing, you can learn about Bitcoin at bitcoinisbetter.org. They have efforts with Habitat for Humanity. They're focusing on people becoming savers again, of course, like we've been talking about, and helping people. And also they have merch. If you want to spark some orange pill conversations with your family or friends, you should buy their merch. And then of course, also, if you are a church or any religious organization or charity group, religious, non-religious, Christian, or otherwise, whatever the case, I'd love to help you at the Bitcoin Advisor. Obviously you have the honeypot problem. You need to have a multi-sig solution. If you find me at thebitcoinadvisor.com/Luke Broyles, you can learn about the Bitcoin Advisor specifically and collaborative custody multi-sig solutions in general. I can send you dozens of pages of free paperwork, and you can book a free meeting with me, right? One of my greatest pleasures since you and I have last spoken a couple months ago is the first churches have started reaching out to me at the Bitcoin Advisor, and we're getting their treasuries in Bitcoin. We're helping them save in Bitcoin. And it's been really interesting to be a part of those conversations and to see that happen. And a huge honor to be a part of that, to see that churches, mostly churches outside the US, mostly mission organizations outside the US, but actually some in the US too, are starting to understand the significance of this and starting to realize we need Bitcoin. And we're not doing fake ETF Bitcoin. We're not doing fake GBTC Bitcoin. We want real Bitcoin. And we know we have to have the multi-sig solution there. So a lot of shout outs there, but please, all those things, some of those things, please check them out. It really helps out me and Daniel personally, keeps us motivated. But then also I think it's better for Bitcoin and humanity as a whole. So with that said, wrapping up here, Daniel, we've talked a lot about the humanitarian benefits for Bitcoin. I know you said you don't give specific Bitcoin price projections, but is there a little factoid, perspective, or way of trying to communicate Bitcoin's for future purchasing power that you love to use to communicate to people?
I'd say I like Greg Foss's approach. He's like, I'll give a number, but I'm not going to give a time. So that's how I approach it, because I don't know. I mean, for the first time in a long time, we've had a reduction in the dollar supply over the last year. I mean, we've lived through a reduction. So I don't know what the Fed is going to do. I don't know what Washington, D.C. is going to do. So I don't know the time, but my prediction is $1 million for a house in America during my lifetime. So the next decade or two, one house for 1 million sats.
One house for 1 million sats within a couple decades. That's yeah. My perspective on 1 million sats, my little fun anecdote there is that there's 5 billion adults on the planet, right? 4% of those 5 billion adults is 200 million people, right? 200 million working adults, right? There's 60 million millionaires. 200 million is, the top quarter of the modern, developed world, right? And there's less than 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges. Aggregate that out, 100 million, 1 million chunks for those 2 million coins. All it takes is 4%, the global adult population, to desire 1 million sats to suck them off exchanges forever. So with 4% of the world not wanting one Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
But wanting 1 million sats, there's no more Bitcoin. And price goes up until they're sellers in the margins.
Mind blowing. Yeah, the scarcity aspect, I just don't think we can grasp that. I mean, we're still an ancient world. So
exactly,
scarce money, it's like we're grasping at straws.
Yeah. We are the goat herders trying to describe the purchasing power of 747. And people criticize us for saying, "What do you mean that 747 is worth infinite goats? That's so dumb. You're a joke. You're a clown." It's like, no, it's true. It's right.
Yeah.
If you're thinking from that first principle. So one other way I think of it too is you mentioned the hundreds of trillions in that, I forget the name of the book you mentioned, but in that book you mentioned, even back in 2011, hundreds of trillions of unfunded liabilities. At the time of recording, there's over 200 trillion of unfunded liabilities in the US. And there's only under 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges. So you divide that out, that's like 100 million US dollars per coin. Obviously, it's a little oversimplistic because liabilities, not cash, and there's less than 2 million. So obviously there's nuance there, obviously. But point being that Daniel and I are making is that Bitcoin is very valuable in terms of a monetary system that is increasingly less valuable. So
And just to,
whatever
just
the
to
case, mhm,
keep it simple, Luke, it's
Yeah.
like if you think about the incentives of the people who hold that debt, who control that debt, is their incentive to make that debt worth more or less in the future? Less. So that means they have to devalue the unit. So it's as simple as incentives. Like
Yeah.
those big numbers, they have to become less costly over time.
yeah,
They can't print more Bitcoin. So that's why Bitcoin's going up forever, Luke, in the words of Sailor, right? It's just incentives.
Yep. Yep. Bitcoin's going up indefinitely. And I hope and I pray that as Bitcoin goes up indefinitely, that it helps more and more people perpetually in the future have higher standards of living and reorient their priorities in the right direction. So, Daniel, thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.